The radar screen went dark at 0347 local time. Complete silence. The USS Carney's Combat Information Center had just watched what should have been a clean kill 2 Tomahawk cruise missiles slamming into the Iranian Shahid Soleimani-class corvette 15 miles off Bandar Abbas. Standard operating procedure: fire, confirm impact, move to next target. Except this time, something was wrong, because 12 minutes later, that same destroyed warship lit up the night sky with a surface-to-air missile launch that nobody saw coming. What happened in those 12 minutes would rewrite everything we thought we knew about Iran's naval capabilities, and more importantly, about what happens when you corner a regime that has absolutely nothing left to lose. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind to 72 hours earlier, when the first spark ignited what would become the most intense naval engagement in the Strait of Hormuz since the tanker wars of the 1980s. March 11th started like any other day for the crew of the Mayari Nari, a Thai-registered bulk carrier hauling 63,000 tons of grain from Jebel Ali port in the United Arab Emirates. Captain Somchai Prakarnrat had made this run 47 times in his career, 47 times through the Strait of Hormuz without incident. But today was number 48, and 48 was different. At 0923 ship time, the bridge lookout spotted something that looked like a large bird moving impossibly fast across the morning sky. That bird was traveling at 220 knots. Birds don't travel at 220 knots. By the time Captain Prakarnrat reached for the radio, 2 Shahed 136 drones had already slammed into his ship's portside hull, igniting 4,000 gallons of diesel fuel and turning the forward cargo hold into an inferno that his crew had zero chance of controlling. The thing about modern naval warfare is that it doesn't announce itself with sirens and declarations. It arrives as a streak in the sky that you barely register before your world explodes. 20 crew members abandoned ship within 11 minutes, picked up by Omani naval vessels that had been shadowing commercial traffic ever since tensions escalated. 3 engineers stayed behind, trying desperately to save a ship that was already lost, until the Omani Navy physically extracted them 4 hours later. 0 casualties, which sounds like good news until you realize what the attack actually accomplished. Because this was about sinking 1 bulk carrier, this was a message written in smoke and fire across the throat of global energy supply, and the world was about to find out just how serious Iran was about delivering that message. Within 6 hours, 2 more vessels absorbed strikes. The Japanese container ship One Majesty took a projectile 28 miles northwest of Ras Al Khaimah, minor damage. Major implications. The Marshall Islands flagged Star Gwyneth caught another strike while anchored 30 miles northwest of Dubai. Hull breach in the cargo hold, but no injuries. 3 ships, 3 separate attack vectors, 3 very clear signals that Iran had decided to activate what defense analysts have been warning about for decades: its ability to weaponize geography itself. You see, the Strait of Hormuz is just a waterway. It's a choke point that handles 17 million barrels of oil every single day, accounting for roughly 30% of all seaborne traded petroleum worldwide. And Iran sits on one side of that choke point with a very simple calculation running through its military command structure: if we're going down, we're taking the global economy with us. Dr. Farzin Nadimi, senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, laid it out in terms that should terrify anyone who understands energy markets. Iran's strategy is to win a conventional naval battle. They know they can't. The strategy is to make the Strait of Hormuz so dangerous that insurance premiums skyrocket, shipping companies reroute, and oil prices spike to levels that force diplomatic intervention on Iran's terms. And the math backs him up. When the attacks hit on March 11th, Brent crude jumped from $91 to $118 per barrel in less than 4 hours of trading. Lloyd's of London immediately raised war risk premiums for the Persian Gulf by 400%. 6 major shipping companies announced temporary suspensions of Strait of Hormuz transits pending security reassessment. Iran didn't need to sink 100 ships. It just needed to sink 3 and watch the cascading economic panic do the rest of the work. But here's where Iran's plan hit a problem it didn't anticipate, and that problem's name was Donald Trump. The The U.S. president had been watching Iranian naval movements for weeks through satellite feeds and signals intelligence that tracked every vessel, every drone, every mine-laying operation. And on March 10th, one day before the Mayari Nari attack, Trump sent a message via Truth Social that read, "Less like diplomacy and more like a countdown timer if Iran has put out any mines in the Hormuz Strait. And we have no reports of them doing so. We want them removed immediately. If for any reason mines were placed, and they are not removed forthwith, the military consequences to Iran will be at a level never seen before." 13 minutes after the first reports of the Mayari Nari attack reached the White House Situation Room, Trump was back on Truth Social. "I am pleased to report that within the last few hours, we have hit and completely destroyed 10 inactive mine-laying boats and slasher ships, with more to follow." 13 minutes. Iran attacked a bulk carrier, and 13 minutes later, the United States had already obliterated 10 naval vessels in retaliatory strikes that were so precisely coordinated they had to have been pre-planned and waiting for authorization. This was a scramble response. This was a loaded gun with someone's finger already on the trigger, just waiting for Iran to provide legal justification to pull it. And pull it the U.S. did, with devastating efficiency. U.S. Central Command confirmed strikes against 16 mine-laying vessels total, plus what they initially described as several other naval assets. That phrase, several other naval assets, turned out to be Pentagon speak for we just eliminated an entire class of Iranian warships in one night. Rear Admiral Michael Studman, former Director of Naval Intelligence, spelled out the magnitude in an interview with Defense News. What we witnessed on March 10th and 11th was the operational decapitation of Iran's mine warfare capability and a significant portion of its coastal defense fleet. We're talking about the last 4 Shahid Soleimani-class corvettes, multiple Ghadir-class midget submarines, and shore-based anti-ship missile batteries that Iran spent 2 decades building and positioning, all gone in roughly 18 hours of sustained strike operations. 18 hours, 2 decades of capability development, erased in less than a day. The U.S. strike waves came from multiple vectors. B-2 stealth bombers launching JASSMs from outside Iranian airspace, Virginia-class submarines firing Tomahawks from the Gulf of Oman, F-35s dropping JDAMs on hardened bunkers along the coast. Iran's air defense network, already degraded from weeks of prior strikes, couldn't track half the incoming munitions and couldn't intercept the ones it did track. By the time the sun rose on March 12th, U.S. Central Command was reporting over 5,500 targets struck since Operation Epic Fury began in late February, with more than 60 of those targets being Iranian naval vessels. But here's the thing that nobody was talking about in those first few hours of celebration over America's overwhelming firepower advantage. 5,500 targets struck in 2 weeks is not sustainable. Former Air Force strategist Preston Stewart ran the numbers and arrived at a conclusion that should concern anyone paying attention to munitions stockpiles and industrial capacity. We're averaging 500 targets per day. That's an incredible operational tempo, but it cannot all be done with standoff munitions. We have Tomahawks, we have ATAC-MS, we have JASSM ERs, but we don't have unlimited quantities. At this rate of expenditure, we'll need to transition to cheaper guided bombs delivered by manned aircraft, which means accepting higher risk to pilots and platforms. And that's when Iran decided to reveal that it had been holding back something that nobody expected. Remember that Shahid Soleimani-class corvette that the USS Carney hit at 0347, the one that went dark on radar and was marked as destroyed in the mission report? At 0359, 12 minutes after impact, that corvette's fire control radar came back online. At 4:02, it launched a Syad-3 surface-to-air missile at a U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft operating 40 miles away. The missile missed, but the message didn't. Iran had just demonstrated something that changed the entire calculus of the naval campaign. Its warships were equipped with automatic damage control systems and backup power generation that could restore combat capability, even after sustaining hits that would cripple conventional vessels. Commander Sarah Chen, tactical action officer aboard the USS Carney, described the moment in a now declassified after-action report. We observed impact. We saw secondary explosions. We had every indication of a catastrophic kill. When that fire control radar lit up again, there was a solid 3 seconds where nobody in the CIC said anything because we were processing something that shouldn't have been possible. Then training kicked in and we engaged. But those 3 seconds of hesitation in naval combat, that's an eternity. The corvette didn't survive the second engagement. The Carney put 2 more Tomahawks into it, along with a full missile volley from an accompanying destroyer. But the point had been made. Iran's naval forces were more resilient than intelligence assessments had predicted, and that resilience was going to cost the U.S. more munitions, more time, and more risk than anyone had planned for. But the real nightmare scenario was the corvettes, or even the mine-laying vessels. It was what came next, and what's still out there right now, prowling the shallow waters of the Strait of Hormuz, where U.S. destroyers can't effectively operate. Iran has over 1,500 fast attack craft, small, highly maneuverable boats equipped with rocket pods, heavy machine guns, and short-range anti-ship missiles. These aren't sophisticated warships. They're essentially weaponized speedboats operated by Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps naval units that train for one specific scenario: swarm tactics. Get close fast, launch everything, scatter before the target can coordinate a response. U.S. Navy vessels are designed to engage threats at long range with sophisticated missile systems. They're not optimized for fighting dozens of small boats zigzagging through commercial shipping lanes at 40 knots while using civilian vessels as visual cover. Vice Admiral Brad Cooper, former commander of U.S. Naval Forces Central Command, warned about this exact scenario in congressional testimony 6 months before the war began. Our Aegis combat systems can track and engage hundreds of targets simultaneously, but there's a point where sheer numbers overwhelm defensive capability, especially in restricted waters where rules of engagement require positive identification before weapons release. Iran knows this. Their entire coastal defense doctrine is built around exploiting the gap between our technological superiority and the operational constraints of fighting in a crowded littoral environment. And now, Iran is leaning into that doctrine with everything it has left. Because the regime understands something that's fundamental to asymmetric warfare: you don't have to win. You just have to make winning so expensive that your opponent decides it's not worth the cost. Oil hit $134 per barrel yesterday. Insurance companies are now charging premiums equivalent to 15% of cargo value for any vessel transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Alternative routes through the Suez Canal add 14 days and $2 million in additional fuel costs per voyage. Iran's attack on 3 commercial ships triggered exactly the economic cascade that Dr. Nadimi predicted. And every day, the fighting continues. That cascade amplifies. Meanwhile, the U.S. is burning through precision munitions at a rate that exceeds production capacity, which means the strategic reserve, the stockpile meant for a potential conflict with China, is being depleted for a regional war that has no clear end state. Iran's leadership is watching these numbers just as closely as Washington is, and they're making the same calculation: pain is relative, and they're willing to absorb more of it than America's voters will tolerate. So here's where we are right now, today. As you're watching this, the U.S. has achieved tactical dominance. Iran's major surface combatants are gone. Its mine warfare capability is degraded. Its coastal missile batteries are being systematically destroyed. But strategic victory, that's still out of reach, because Iran still controls those 1,500 fast attack craft, still has thousands of drones, still has enough operational capability to keep the Strait of Hormuz dangerous enough that shipping companies think twice before entering. And that's all Iran needs. Not victory, just enough chaos to force negotiations on terms that leave the regime intact. The question isn't whether the U.S. can destroy Iran's military. We're watching that happen in real time. The question is whether destroying Iran's military actually achieves the strategic objective of reopening the Strait of Hormuz to normal commercial traffic at acceptable risk levels. Because right now, even with 60 Iranian warships at the bottom of the Persian Gulf, oil tankers are still rerouting, prices are still spiking, and every maritime insurance analyst in the world is telling their clients the same thing: the Strait of Hormuz is a gamble, and the house odds just got a lot worse. Iran played its leverage card. America responded with overwhelming force. And somehow, we've arrived at a stalemate where both sides are losing, but neither can afford to back down. And that corvette that fired back after taking 2 Tomahawks, the one that shouldn't have been able to fight after sustaining that kind of damage. U.S. naval intelligence just confirmed that Iran has 17 more vessels equipped with the same resilience systems, and we have no idea where they are right now.